Hello and welcome to DocSend's Perfect Pitch video series, where we put our research and data to work to help you fundraise. My name is Justin Itzo, and I run research here at DocSend. Today's video is titled The Importance of Monetization and Traction at the Seed Stage. Now, the data for today's video comes from DocSend's 2020-2021 Seed Report. Let's dive in. In today's video, I wanted to take you through two sections that stood out in our research for related but opposing reasons. And these sections we labeled as the make or break sections of a founder's seed pitch. The first of these is the business plan or business model section. Now, we found that investors spent more time on the business model section of decks that successfully raised their round. The second section is the market traction section. And we found that investors spent more time on the traction section of decks that did not successfully raise their round. Hence why we called these two sections the make in the case of the business model section, or the break in the case of the market traction section, elements of a founder's seed pitch. Now, for the business model section, there's one main question that you want to make sure you answer. Is your monetization plan repeatable over time and scalable? So can it grow as your company grows? Now, for the market traction section, you want to ensure that your product has enough stickiness that relates to its stage. Have you established a clear product market fit that's appropriate for the seed stage? Now, what does traction mean in this context? Founders tend to show several different potential forms of traction at the seed stage. These could be letters of intent, testimonials from current customers, a well-defined customer pipeline, or feedback from beta trialers. Now, when it comes to the business model section, we found that it was of high value, and not just in the amount of time that investors spent on this section. But to speak to that just for a moment, we found that investors spent nearly twice as much time on the business model section in decks that they ended up funding. Now, what this means is that, on the one hand, seed founders should be very thorough in how they prepare these sections. These could be a 1 to 3 page section where you're outlining what your business model is and how it's scalable, and in very simple language, how you plan to make money. And on the other hand, what it also means is that if you present to investors that you've really thought about what your monetization plan is, they'll reward you by spending a lot of time on this section and really digesting what you have to say. Now, as they always say, time is money. And we found that the extra time that investors spent on this section was worth more than $150,000 in seed funding. I don't need to tell founders how important that $150K can actually be for their business. The point is, develop your business model well in advance, and don't just append it as an afterthought when you're making up your seed deck. Now, what are the actionable tips that we can take away from these make or break sections? The first is that your business needs to be mature at the seed stage. That doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out, but it does mean that investors are looking for more than just a cool idea at this stage. In fact, they're looking for fully fledged businesses at earlier and earlier stages of the startup life cycle. And this is probably because there's more money and more at stake in earlier rounds of funding than ever before. So, as I said earlier, think about these sections before you make your pitch deck. And ideally, develop your monetization plan at the same time that you're developing your product. Do this so that you can show investors that there's an organic relationship between your monetization plan and the cool product that you're putting out there in the world. The second tip is to show true and meaningful traction. Ask yourself and any advisors you're working with if your traction is convincing. We found that investors are ready to be quickly convinced by notable traction at the seed stage. And if they find that it's not convincing, they'll spend extra time on your section, giving it scrutiny that may not work in your favor. Now, at the seed stage, founders should try to show multiple forms of traction. So I mentioned before, letters of intent, testimonials, an established pipeline, or feedback from beta customers. Companies at the pre-seed stage might only be able to show one of these, but at the seed stage, your goal should be to show maybe more than one. Now, this used to be the case only at the Series A stage, but we found that as the funding has become more competitive at the seed round. The requirements have become more stringent. So investors are really looking to see multiple forms of notable traction at this stage. The second is a memorable pitch for your, or the third rather, is a memorable pitch for your business model. You want, on the one hand, a very thorough business model section that shows the amount of time and energy you've put into thinking through how you plan to monetize your product. On the other hand, you don't want your business model laden with jargon, and you don't want it to be difficult to understand. You want someone, your investors or your parents or your friends, to be able to recap in just a single sentence how your company plans to make money. This should be easy to understand for a VC in your field or a VC who might be far afield from the space that you're working in. But this should be easily understandable and memorable so that your investors come away with a very clear idea, not just of what your product and traction are, but about how that can yield monetization over time. And those are our tips for monetization and traction at the seed stage. To dive deeper into the data, visit DocSend.com/perfectpitch.